Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will present the budget this Tuesday on July 23rd. India saw an impressive 8.2% growth over the last 1 year, and this has been the highest among all major global economies, even when we face major challenges like poor consumption growth and lower private investments. In today's video, we will cover four things. The first thing is why the Indian government is under pressure. The second point is to cover the fiscal deficit reduction that is required in the Indian economy. The third point here is to look at what are the key budget expectations we can look forward to for specific sectors such as infra, power, renewables, construction, and many more. And finally, what is it that the Indian economy will need to form this budget to achieve Viksit Bharat by 2047? So stay tuned and let's get into it. The Modi government is under pressure to stimulate the consumption and create employment for India's large workforce, with 67 in the working age group as of now. Addressing employment is one of the top priorities, and the Prime Minister is already engaging with economists and many senior officials in the industry to explore strategies for growth and employment. Experts are highlighting the need for more disposable income through tax cuts and cash income support. Despite robust economic growth, India faces weak consumption and investment. The private final consumption expenditure grew at just 4%, which is a 20-year low. The agricultural growth, which is a critical component of rural income, was only 1.4% in 2024, below the pre-pandemic average of 4.4%. Household debt has also reached a record of 39.1% of GDP, indicating a widespread financial strain. Despite all of these challenges, India's economic outlook remains positive. RBI has projected around 7.2% growth for the current fiscal year, along with supporting and recovering private consumption, continued investment activity, the government's focus on capital spending, and improving the overall balance sheet in the corporate and the banking sectors. Now, in the next part, let's look at fiscal deficit reduction. The interim budget is estimated at a fiscal deficit of about 5.1%, which is an improvement over the 5.6% that it was last year. Now, we're expecting the government to lower this number to about 4.9% of GDP without compromising on the capital expenditure target of around 11.1 lakh crores. But how will the government achieve this fiscal deficit reduction? The first point is revenue buoyancy. It is crucial for lowering the fiscal deficit. The incremental revenue receipts of about 1.2 lakh crores enables an increased revenue spending and ultimately helps with fiscal consolidation. The second point here is that the additional revenue that is coming in through the economy could ultimately also improve consumption through income tax ops, enhancing disposable income, and ultimately this is a good multiplier effect for the economy. The government plans to reduce net market borrowings by 35,000 to 55,000 crores, and this reduction is expected to benefit the bond yields, and especially as we look at the inclusion of the Indian government securities in the JP Morgan government bond index, which is ultimately going to help boost demand. Now, reducing fiscal deficit over the next 3 to 4 years is a challenge, but it's a critical piece for us to solve. A decline in the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio will also depend on the increase in the nominal GDP that happens. Now, the government has on-budgeted a significant portion of previously off-budgeted capex, and this capex is about, let's say, 1% of the GDP has been brought on budget. The government could reduce its fiscal deficit target to even, let's say, 4% of GDP over the medium term, aiming for a sub 4.5% target by, let's say, 2026. So now let's look at specific sectors and what are the budget expectations for these sectors. We'll start with the Indian capital goods, the construction, and the infrastructures. The capital goods sector expects momentum from the government's continued focus on capex and infra spending. We expect more focus on production-linked incentive schemes to come through in this budget. So let's look at specific items that we can look at. Adhering to the 11.1 lakh crore focus on roads, power, urban development, and railways. Companies like ABB, Siemens, and L&T with substantial order books should benefit from strong execution plans. There's also an increase in government's capital spending on infra projects, which will align with the National Infrastructure Pipeline and the Gati Shakti Master Plan. In addition to this, we can also expect about 10 to 15% year-on-year increase in allocation towards the Ministry of Road, Transport and Highways, which is to help India by 2047 achieve its Viksit Bharat plan, which is targeting about 20 trillion worth of roads and about 50,000 kilometers of access controlled highways. Major highway projects are also expected to boost cement demand, which will benefit companies like Ultratech Cement, Ambuja Cements, and many more. And also, there is a renewed focus on affordable housing schemes in rural markets, which could benefit urban developers like MICL and TALK, for instance. Now, let's move on to the Indian power and the green energy sectors. The Indian power's demand has grown significantly, driven by initiatives like Make in India and the PLI schemes. And here's what we can kind of expect. We're expecting an improvement in the financing and the incentives that are available to green energy and renewable energy projects, with potential reductions in GST and any customs duties on the components that these renewable energy projects are using. In addition to this, budget allocations on rooftop solar installations and alternative green energy sources such as compressed biogas, ethanol, and green hydrogen are also expected. We can also expect a further increase in allocation for the National Green Hydrogen Mission. We're also expecting an establishment of a nodal agency for hydropower development and incentives for pumped storage plants. This is something that the industry is really looking forward to. In addition to this, there are also plans to add about 50 to 55 gigawatts of thermal power over the next 6 to 7 years, which could benefit conventional thermal players like BHEL as well. In terms of transmission line companies and power equipment manufacturers, we can expect them to also gain from the need for evacuation systems for all of these power projects that are going to come up. And finally, when we look at the renewable energy sector, the adjustments that can be coming in for the customs duty on solar cells or expansion of PLI schemes to boost domestic production, which will ultimately help reduce the reliance on imports from other countries. Finally, we can also look at another key sector which has been booming is the AI and the data center sector. India's data center capacity is expected to double by 2026, requiring about 50,000 crores in investments. India's data center market is expected to grow from 4.5 billion to about 11.6 billion dollars by 2032. And ultimately, what we're expecting from the budget is to help this industry grow a bit more. Tax incentives, infrastructure development, renewable energy subsidies, streamlined policies will all help the data center and the AI sort of space to grow. And ultimately, what we're also looking forward to is the ability to reduce operational challenges. So by addressing, let's say, lengthy approval processes, the high operational costs with government incentives for, let's say, renewable energy adoption, for instance, to reduce costs and ultimately promote sustainability for the sector as well. Now let's look at the most important part that we need from this budget, which is what is it that the Indian economy actually needs, and how can we achieve Viksit Bharat by 2047 as the government has laid it out. This budget is also building towards that Viksit Bharat philosophy or policy that the government has outlined. The government strategy obviously includes leveraging revenue buoyancy, as we spoke about earlier, reducing market borrowings, and maintaining high levels of capex, which will ultimately drive growth and help development. But there are key government interventions which will be needed to stimulate multiplier effects across the economy. And let's look at each of them one by one. First, we need to boost private investments. Private investment in India surged post-liberalization until about 2007-2008 financial crisis, at which point it was peaking at about 27% of GDP. Since then, it has declined to a low of about 19.6% as of 2020. In 2020 specifically, the government also cut the corporate tax rate from about 30% to 22% to help stimulate the private investment sector. But the COVID-19 obviously dampened any economic stimulus that happened. Despite all of this, there's about 5 lakh crore in tax benefits that have been given to the corporate sector over the past 5 years. However, corporate tax collections have only marginally increased by about 24.45%. The second point that we'll sort of look at is the manufacturing boost that's needed for the economy. Manufacturing companies are currently operating at about 64% capacity utilization, which is well below the optimal level of about 85% that is needed to stimulate new investments in the sector. Boosting consumption is critical to revive the economy again. And there are about 3-4 points that we can look at here. First is to elevate domestic manufacturing to become a global hub. We need to plan for comprehensively for growing our high-tech sectors like defense, electronics, semiconductors, and many more, and ultimately strengthening the MSMEs through government industry collaboration. The third point here is a tax relief for salaried people. Experts are predicting a lower income tax rates under the new tax regime for those earning up to 10 lakh rupees and those with a potential relief for earning above 15 lakh rupees as well. Key expectations include increasing the basic exemption limit from about 3 lakhs to 5 lakhs potentially, reducing tax liabilities, enhancing deductions. Ultimately, what we need is a more simplified tax structure, which is already pretty strong to begin with. By further simplifying the tax regime to help businesses do their work in the economy, streamline capital gains tax with fewer categories and uniform rates, and ultimately rationalize the TDS rate structure to ease compliance and reduce any litigation that's there. The ultimate impact of all of these measures is to obviously reduce the tax burden, but it'll also help boost consumption as we have more disposable income as people in the economy. It will also help address the high cost of living that's happening in the current context of the world, and also encourage savings among lower and higher income groups. This could also improve operating ratios, stimulate capital expenditure, and create jobs, which is ultimately a multiplier effect again happening for the economy. The fourth point here is we need to build skilled workforce and solve unemployment. The unemployment rate rose to about 9.2% in June 2024, which is up from about 7% in May. The previous budget had reduced allocation to the Ministry of Labour and Employment from about 16,000-17,000 crores to about 13,000-14,000 crores. And the focus in that previous budget was on infrastructure development and ultimately helping that to indirectly influence employment. At the same time, we look at, let's say, the National Rural Job Guarantee Scheme, the MGNREGA, we're unlikely to sort of expect any massive increase in allocations towards this scheme. The interim budget estimates stood at around 60,000 crores for FY24 and about 86,000 crores for FY25. And ultimately in June, we're looking at about nearly 35 million individuals who were seeking jobs or work under this scheme, which is about a 22.5% decrease from the previous year. Economists are attributing a stagnation in rural consumption and weak FMCG growth to the lower demand that is there for these guaranteed rural jobs that are available through the scheme. Ultimately, the expectation for the upcoming budget is to include demands from employee unions for the establishment of the 8th Pay Commission, restoration of the old pension scheme, and maybe even fulfilling existing job vacancies. Another point is that economists are anticipating job creation through labor-intensive manufacturing in sectors like textiles, toys, apparels, incentives for commercial aircraft manufacturing, and many more such incentives from the budget. Additionally, with the increasing push that's happening towards AI, there are also recommendations for provisions to reskill workers affected by AI, including maybe even a robot tax proposal. And finally, the fifth point, and probably the most important point, is that we need more research and more development enhancement in the economy. There is an increase in R&D spending that needs to happen to above about 1% of the GDP, which is pretty standard for most growing and developed economies. Operationalize the 1 trillion corpus of for research in sunrise sectors that are there. We need to foster innovation in clusters through collaboration between, let's say, the private sector, the academia, and the government. And all of this is very important for us as an economy to grow towards the Viksit Bharat sort of vision that the government has sort of put forward as part of the 2047 plan. In conclusion, the upcoming Union Budget 2024, which will be presented on Tuesday, holds significant promise for India's key sectors, including capital goods, construction, infra, power, green energy, AI, and data centers, and many other sectors as well, with a strong focus on robust capex, infra development, incentivizing private investments. The government can lay a solid foundation for India's journey towards becoming a developed nation by 2047. Do comment below on what do you expect from this budget. What sectors do you think will be in focus? Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more such updates on stock markets and the Indian economy.
Investment in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.